Hello and a very warm welcome to Money Control. What a day it was yesterday. We saw exit poll numbers coming out and we saw India's roaring GDP numbers at 7.6%. So, is this India's decade of roaring growth? India's GDP expanded at 7.6% in the second quarter, beating RBI's estimates of 6.5% and comfortably placing India on track to achieve 6.7% growth in FY24. Now, that's music to our ears because economies around the world are struggling. And clearly, construction, manufacturing, it surpassed all expectations, expanding in double digits. Services sector, however, and agriculture shows worrying signs. The data also came on the day of exit poll results, which have thrown a mixed picture on how much of is the state of our economy getting reflected in our voting behavior. And we will talk about is the India growth story here to stay? A few questions that I'm hoping to get in my panelists on. So, is the good news on India's growth numbers finally good again? Why are economists revising their growth forecasts? What did they miss? Do we see the state of the economy get reflected in the exit poll numbers? And what is driving India's resilience? To understand this in greater detail, I'm joined by Amitabh Dubey from the Congress Party, Mr. K Shrivastava, Policy Advisor of EY, Indra Shekhar Singh, Agri Policy Expert, and Vivek Kumar from QuantEco Research, and Mr. Amit Malviya joining us very soon. Let me begin with you, Vivek. QuantEco put out a paper saying yesterday, just like a wow. Now, does that capture all that's going on with the Indian economy?
Hi, Shweta. Thank you. I think it kind of borrows the adage from the social media memes, but yes, on the headline, it's actually a wow number because, as you said, the number kind of exceeded market expectations by a fair margin. Markets were expecting anywhere close to 6.7, 6.8%. The number was way higher than what the street expectation was. So headline is pretty strong, a stellar performance, I would say. Now, as in case of India, you always have positives and negatives, and the GDP data is all about that. The headline is pretty strong, but there are also a few concerns. Concerns are on the demand side, you have private consumption, which has slowed down. The concern is on the external front, which is kind of a lingering concern for quarters now, and that has been slowing. On the supply side, you have agriculture sector, which posted a very weak performance, and services have been slowing down. So if you see what has been pulling up the GDP growth performance, on the demand side, it's investments, primarily being driven by government. On the supply side, it is manufacturing sector. In fact, if I can be a little bit more liberal, then I would say the entire industrial basket is such, which is enjoying the government's capex push, number one. Number two, there were some idiosyncrasies with respect to monsoon unevenness, which helps sectors like mining and quarrying. And number three, there was a strong statistical boost from drop in input price inflation. So when input price inflation drops and output price inflation kind of remains stable, the margins tends to expand, and that shows up in higher profitability for the non-financial corporate sector. So all these things put together, they supported GDP growth, whereas there was also a few areas of concern, as I pointed it out earlier.
Right. Thanks. Thanks for that. Let me go across to Mr. K Shrivastava. Mr. Shrivastava, did you see this coming? You said that you were positively surprised by these numbers. What is it that the economists were not expecting?
Well, I think it is the drive that was introduced by the government's front-loaded capital spending, which led to gross fixed capital formation growing in the first half at 9.5%, which is the one that leads to a domestic demand-driven growth and particularly investment-driven growth. And that we did not expect it to be this much. So we knew that the government is front-loading, but it was of a substantial magnitude. The other factor, I think, where recovery is very strong, is in manufacturing, because last quarter manufacturing growth was somewhat lower. But when we put the two together, it is giving us a first half growth of 9.3%, which is very robust. So those are very positive, but it is also, except for agriculture, as you said earlier, it is quite broad based. And one of the large service sectors, which was is still in the negative as compared to the pre-COVID era, that is trade, hotels, transport, communication, and services. That sector showed in the first half now a growth of 6.6%. So that because it's a very employment intensive sector, so that led to a very positive impact because it also has a high weight. So, in some sense, it is the investment in capital expenditure which has a lot of crowding in effect, and it led to upsurge in manufacturing also, and therefore, in fact, led to a broad-based recovery. So that is the positive news, which was mostly expected. The only it is in terms of the extent that there is a surprise. The two negative factors are that agriculture has slowed down, and of course that was not unanticipated because there was a deficient monsoon that was expected, and it had an uneven spread. So, year as a whole, if we can make up something like 3% in agriculture, I would still be quite satisfied. The one uh, most adverse factor for the Indian economy, again not anticipated, is the negative contribution of net exports, which is to say that our imports are more than our exports by a significant margin, and global uncertainties, demand for exports falling, etc. All of this is leading to this. Now, my sense is going forward that as net exports is going to remain adverse for us, it is domestic demand that has to drive growth, and it is that one that distinguishes India from rest of the world, and many export oriented economies such as China and European economies. I think we are slated to do much better than most of our peers.
So India will continue to be the bright spot, Mr. Shrivastava.
Yeah, I think we will clock in something like 6.3 to 6.5% in the medium term, which is also IMF's forecast. And if we, by some means, we can somehow reduce even the negative contribution of net exports to zero, we can do even better. We can even come close to 7% in the medium term.
Okay. Indra, do you share that optimism? You're on the ground. You've been closely documenting the agricultural landscape of the country. Do you think the pain has been captured in the GDP numbers, or is it going to get worse before it gets better?
It's actually going to get much worse. And let me simplify what some of the earlier panelists have said. They've said that because of government investment into the economy and other investment-driven methods, that's why the numbers are kind of inflated. Once that thing is removed, those artificial bubble that's being created with the help of investments coming from the government and from the treasury and other places, that's why you see these growth figures that are so high. Now, when you look at agriculture, that's 60% of this country. Now, when agricultural production contracts, you're looking at a major problem. That's why 800 million people in this country need rations from the government. When we look at other data, which is the Kharif crop estimates, we know that basically the government is completely ambiguous on them because the monsoon data clearly shows that there's been less rainfall. The water reservoir data is already told us that there is very little water in all of our country. And agriculture production has been dampened beyond what the government is telling us. Even USDA said that Indian agriculture production is going to fall by a large margin. So this GDP data, when they tell us that agriculture is contracted, they're actually revealing a chink in their own armor. The government has been fudging up data. They have been giving out ambiguous data. But when you compare them,
let's not make allegations
no. It's not allegations. I'll not make allegations, Shweta. Allow me to please prove my point. That's why I said three data. First, look at the Kharif crop estimate data. Second, look at the rainfall data. Third, look at the kind of water that's present in our reservoirs. All these are three data given by the government. Then look at the USDA data on on Indian kharif production. You will see that there is a matching. There is a matching.
Sure.
The only
Just
data
hold
that
that
stands
thought.
out.
Please hold that thought.
And finally,
we'll come back to you. Indra, we'll come back to you. Please hold that thought. I'd also like to welcome Amit Malviya, who's joining us from the BJP. Amit, before you joined, we were talking about the India growth story and the GDP numbers that came out, and then the exit poll results that have come out yesterday. I want to get your sense on the correlation between the GDP numbers that we are seeing and the exit poll results. Any thoughts that you'd like to share with us on that?
Shweta, thank you for having me on this program. First, I'd like to talk about the exit poll numbers. Well, directionally, most exit polls seem to suggest that the BJP will storm back to power in Rajasthan, retain Madhya Pradesh, and we are in a dead heat contest in Chhattisgarh, a state where most pollsters had not given BJP a chance till about 2 months back. So, of course, a lot has changed as far as Chhattisgarh is concerned. And it seems like the BJP on 3rd of December will win in all the three Hindi heartland states. Now, this is quite significant because the BJP 5 years ago had lost all these three states in the run-up to 2019. Why is the BJP today in a pole position in some of the most populous states in the country, including Uttar Pradesh? Now, Madhya Pradesh has the exit poll show, and we've been in power for 20 years. Rajasthan, which is another large state, so to say. The reason is very simple. We have been focused on governance. Prime Minister Modi's government and their schemes have reached to the intended beneficiary. And I use that word very specifically because most governments, particularly those run by the opposition, claim to be giving freebies or state support, if you like, but it's so widely dispersed that it does not reach in the quantum that it should reach those who actually need it. This is a much larger debate, a different debate. Let me just take you back to Karnataka, a state that the Congress won just about 6 months ago, and they're failing to deliver on any of the promises that they made. So much so that the fallout of their lack of ability to deliver is now impacting their fortunes in other states.
All right.
Having said that,
yes, please finish that thought, then I'll go across to Amitabh Dubey as well. Just finish that thought, please.
Having said that, if you look at the GDP numbers that have come out, we have reported 7.6%. This is the highest across any large economy in the world, either a developed economy or an emerging economy. Now, that clearly shows that there is something that India is doing right, particularly after the debilitating 2 years of COVID pandemic. The entrepreneurial spirit of the country, along with big government spend, has actually put the economy in a high trajectory zone. And before I conclude my own comments, this growth is actually quite broad-based. I was listening to the commentator before me, and he was picking on numbers, particularly on the agriculture side. But if you look at the overall picture, you will find that it's a very broad-based growth. And clearly, there's always room to improve certain areas and ensure that the growth is even more equitable. Having said that, as we grow our manufacturing sector, you will find that the number of people engaged in agriculture will go down, their per capita income in agriculture will go up, and it will augur well for the economy on an overall basis.
Okay, thanks, Amit, for that. Let me come across to you, Amitabh, on this. Now, we saw the exit poll results yesterday, and it's looking like it's going to be a tough fight between the BJP and the Congress party. The last time we spoke, and we spoke about the welfare argument, and you said that the kind of schemes that the Congress party is offering is because of the demand that there is on ground. But the GDP data does not seem to suggest so. We are looking at a very robust growth above all expectations. So, how are you looking at what's going on ground? Congress did win in Karnataka, and one of the major reasons was the welfare schemes. So, I just want to get a sense from you on, going forward, what is Congress's strategy going to be?
So, just briefly about the exit polls, I'm seeing clearly very different exit polls from Mr. Malviya. What I see is in two states, Telangana and Chhattisgarh, all the polls are consistently placing the Congress ahead in the pole position. In Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, the polls are all over the place. In Rajasthan in particular, breaking past history, some of the polls show the Congress coming back. In Madhya Pradesh, some of them show the Congress ahead, some of them show the BJP ahead. The broader point about the economy, it is correct that the last 4 quarters have shown fairly strong growth. But if you look at a broader picture since before COVID, how India dealt with the COVID shock and how India is coming out of the COVID shock, India's GDP growth is still lower than Vietnam's, China's, Egypt, Bangladesh. Many peer economies are still higher today than they were in 2019, which is just before the COVID shock. So if you look at the immediate past year, there's a strong recovery, but the broader picture is a little more disturbing and disappointing. I would say that on two grounds, there are very serious concerns, and some of the data that came out, private consumption is slower. Agriculture, we've already discussed, is underperforming where the bulk of the population lives. We all know about the K-shaped recovery, where a certain segment of the wealthy is doing very well. So luxury car sales are going up, but the sales of small cars, two-wheelers, are either flat or declining. The fact of inequality is a very serious problem in India. And what it really means is the bulk of the population is missing out on this growth. The second disturbing aspect is, of course, jobs.
Let me bring in the economists here. Let me bring in Vivek and Mr. Shrivastava. Mr. Shrivastava, do we see an unequal growth? Amitabh has raised a few points here. And do we see that trend playing out? And I want Vivek also to come in on this. That do we see this growth momentum continuing going forward for the second half of the year? Mr. Shrivastava first.
Yeah, I definitely see the growth momentum to continue, although it would be less than the first half, because the first half contains certain base effects which will not be continued for the second half. So in the second half, growth would be lower, but it would still deliver to us an annual growth of 6.5% to 6.7% in that range, which would be very high considering large global economies. And India is now a very large size global economy. So in that sense, the second half growth would be lower, but it will still be very robust. Now the question about agriculture, and to that the K-shaped recovery, those two questions are almost interlinked in the sense that since rural population is so large and since employment in agriculture is also much larger, in fact the share of employment in agriculture is much larger than its share in GDP. In GDP, the share has been falling over the years, and it is now only between 15 to 17%, depending on whether we measure it in real terms or current prices. So the share in GDP and the nature of it has been throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and until now, that it is cyclical, and the average cycle is about 3 years. So we have been doing very well in the past 3 to 4 years on agriculture, because the average growth rate in agriculture is only 2.5 to 3%. Anything more than 3% can be considered as very good in GDP terms. So some cyclicality is expected. El Nino has caused the deficiency in monsoon. So I would consider the agricultural impact to be short term, and cycle would turn around in the next 2 years or so. Now the issue is because of the difference between employment and welfare effect of fall in agricultural growth vis-a-vis its impact on GDP. So GDP impact does not fully capture it because of its low share, but definitely employment suffers, and that's where government has to ensure with the schemes like MNREGA and others welfare schemes, whether it is able to compensate the fall in real incomes of agriculturists to meet this shock that is happening,
Right.
which is temporary in my view.
Okay, let me come across to you, Vivek. We've seen services sector, which is crucial, and we've seen that in the results that have been posted by IT companies as well. This is probably the first time, companies like Infosys have not gone in for campus hiring. So this problem of unemployment, one, do you see that? Do we see that stress, that pain point on ground at the moment? And I'm specifically talking about employment created in the services sector. Or do you think that the problem is a bit overstated at this point? And again, it's a short term thing, and India would probably show resilience in this area as well.
So there are two aspects here, Shweta. One is the structural component, which India is facing along with other countries in the world. So it's not something which is peculiar to India. And the hypothesis is that the employment elasticity of GDP growth is falling world over. So nothing to do with India. It's something which is a phenomenon which is playing out globally, which means that to produce the same amount of growth, now you need lesser number of people. Something which is true because your productivity is increasing, people are progressing. So the employment path is suffering globally. That is a more structural thing playing out. From a cyclicality perspective, if we are noting, as you highlighted yourself, that there are IT companies which are not really as gung-ho as they were maybe a year back. Now we've got to realize here that IT companies, predominantly in the case of India, are dependent upon global growth. So if the expectation is that there is likely to be an impending global slowdown, the ripple effects are bound to be felt in sectors which are closely linked for revenues from the global side. IT happens to be one of those important sectors, and you will see that ripple effect playing out in case of IT. So that is something which is unavoidable, and it is likely to be seen. Now, having said that, is there an offsetting impact that could possibly play out? Now, the sense that we are getting is that perhaps there could be some sort of a give or take at an economy-wide level, because there are sectors in the meanwhile which are leading the growth. For example, let's say construction, sectors like mining, and sectors to some extent the infrastructure sector as a whole. Now, all these sectors put together have been very prime beneficiary of the public capex focus, which has not just been shown by the central government, also the states put together. So both center and states put together are front loading their capex at a speed which is extremely healthy. We are talking about numbers in the range of 30, 40, 50% annualized growth. That kind of number, if it is being channelized into sectors which are more employment creating, for example, construction, as I said, mining, and infrastructure sector, then it kind of compensates for the loss for sectors which are more dependent upon global growth for revenue.
Sure. Thanks for that. Can I come across to you, Indra, on this? So you heard Dr. Shrivastava say that the agri pain is right now cyclical and agriculture has done very well. Is that what you're picking up on ground? And the fact that there has been a lot of capex spending happening by the center and the states, is that alleviating some of the rural distress?
See, Shweta, first of all, I'd like to also say that I'm not trying to make a political point. It's not about the BJP or the Congress. It's about the state of the Indian Union and how agriculturally farmers and the food security of this nation both are imperiled. Now, all these facts that I've given you come from the government and state governments, irrespective of the political party. Indian food reserves are at its lowest. We've already had hyper food inflation in tomatoes, in onions, and the rabi sowing, what the reports that I'm getting right now, that because of a delayed monsoon, because of problems in Kharif, there may be rabi sowing problems also. And like we've seen in the past 2 years, where wheat crop was affected in Punjab and Haryana, there is no certainty that we will get a bountiful harvest this time too. The government, I'm not again talking about the BJP or the Congress. The government has put export bans. The government has put stocking limits. The government has taken very, very strict measures to take stock of the food situation in this country. So the government may not want to put public money, but actually the government has ensured every step possible to ensure that food remains in this country. Now that's the seriousness that this country is impacting and talking about. Okay, that's the danger we are in. So when our economist says something, I do not agree with him. It's not cyclical. It's in fact compounding, and this has been happening for the past couple of years actually. And now we're at a point, we're almost nearing a breaking point where the compounding food insecurities matched by erratic rainfall and dampened food production will lead to a food crisis, an imminent food crisis. And that's why, once again, the Prime Minister said that we need 80 crore people on the government food rations. And that's why the Prime Minister reintroduced the food ration schemes. Just look at what the government is doing and not what they are saying. When it comes to food and agriculture, the government is sure that there is a problem ahead. That's why they're putting all these security measures and safety measures. That's my point. And it's not cyclical, sir. It's actually compounding.
Okay. We have two people disagreeing whether it's cyclical or whether it's compounding. But let me bring in Amitabh and Amit here. Amitabh, you heard Indra there, and you heard the Economist as well. Now, which exit poll comes out right or not, we'll know that on Sunday, of course. But if Mr. Gehlot is voted to power, it is going to be a win for welfareism, because the kind of things that Mr. Gehlot has announced, and he really pressed the pedal on announcing a lot of freebies/welfare. Now, that's a worry for economists who are closely watching the India story. It could mean that 2024 could set a new precedent for political parties to build on, and BJP is equally guilty of that. So I just want to get a sense from you on, what does the Congress party stand for right now? Are you batting for welfareism? Are you batting for fiscal prudence? And how confident are you that it's going to be welfare that's going to get you the votes and not growth?
So, the Congress party is responding to a situation. We had very different set of policies 10, 15, 20 years ago. Today, we talk much about welfare. And as you mentioned earlier in your earlier question, that this is because there is huge demand coming from society. There is this need, there is a gap. The Modi government's policies for the last few years have been very supply side oriented, and there's been a huge shortcoming on the demand side. Now, the fact that the Congress party is seeing traction in these elections through the 6 guarantees in Telangana, 5 guarantees in Karnataka, are reflecting this huge gap. Let me just give you some examples. The proportion, this is PLFS data, the proportion of salaried in India, now salaried jobs are the best quality jobs, has been declining since the end of the pandemic. The number of self-employed has been going up. We hear story after story of PhDs applying for jobs as railway peons, engineers ending up in menial jobs. So there's a very serious problem. And because of the lack of security, there is a need for a social net. Now, if you look at Karnataka, if you look at Chhattisgarh, they have implemented many of these policies, but they have been able to strike a balance between the budget and welfareism. And the state deficits have not gone up. In some cases, they have actually gone down in the last year or two. So it's not an easy job to balance these conflicting needs, but at least the Congress state governments so far have been able to do it.
All right, Amit, let me come across to you, and we are almost out of time. BJP, the Modi government, followed a lot of fiscal prudence even during the pandemic. But now in the run-up to elections, we are seeing expansion of a lot of welfare schemes. Also, the BJP has matched the Congress in making announcements on welfare schemes. I want to get a sense from you on what will the BJP stand for post these election results, because overall, the world at large has given their vote of confidence in the kind of economic prudence that India has shown. And that's a very important indicator for FIRs who are looking at India right now to put in their money on the path that the government is going to take going forward.
Shweta, just give me about a minute and a half. I want to address and allay some of the fears that Indra has spoken about. He spoke about the contraction in the agriculture sector, but let me point to you the increase in the contribution of manufacturing sector in the GDP. It's seen a growth of about 13.9% in Q2 FY24. Similarly, growth in construction has been from 7.9% in Q1 to about 13.3% in Q2. Similarly, mining and quarry have seen a significant growth of about 10%. The reason why I mentioned these three specifically is because every time there is a more structural approach to your economy, you will find people moving out of agriculture and moving into manufacturing or labor industries, particularly the construction. And we are seeing that migration happen. And as the Economist before me spoke, a 3% growth in agriculture is actually deemed good. And so India is actually firing on all cylinders. You look at consumption, not just premium vehicles, but also passenger cars and two-wheelers. We're doing exceedingly well. You look at our hotel bookings, they are full. You look at our airlines, we are capped out. So these are all signs of a robust economy. You spoke about fiscal prudence of a Modi government. You would agree that despite all temptation to open up and ensure that we are putting out money there, which could have led to inflationary pressure during COVID, Modi government stuck to more transparent and targeted food subsidy instead, which has led to improvement in the number of poor in this country. The IMF has come out with a report saying that there are only about 1% people in India today who live in extreme poverty, which is less than $1 per day. Now, these are all very encouraging trends. The government is ensuring food subsidy so that it ensures that people have food on the plate. It's also because the government has enough reserves to ensure that it happens. Indra spoke about vegetable prices, but those have been cyclical. I mean, we've seen those for 2 weeks, whether it's tomatoes or onions, and the government has very quickly come in and ensured that the supply chain is addressed because they were an outcome of unseasonal rains. We do realize this. You have an inflation which has been sub 6%. You have unemployment in the country, which is at about 3.2%. It is the lowest in last 6 years. And these are data that has been put out by the Periodic Labor Force Survey. So given this scenario, I don't think there is a reason to be unduly concerned about the state of the economy. We're doing very well. And those in the overseas or international market looking to invest in India, we are the best destination at this point in time. And that is borne out by the FII inflows that we've seen in the last 6 months to a year, and particularly post-COVID. Having said that, Shweta, your question on the political side of the economy, are we going to throw financial prudence to the wind to win elections? My answer is we don't need to do it because, like I said, the targeted subsidy that Modi government has been rolling out for the last 10 years have reached the intended beneficiary without actually compromising the financial health of the country's finances. Unfortunately, the Congress, in its desperation to win elections in Karnataka, has come up with these freebies which are not targeted, which are basically funding consumption, and that is the worry. The problem is not with freebies. The problem is when you start funding consumption and start using state dole as a tool to win votes, and that's where I think we should be very wary of the kind of politics that the Congress is doing. I can assure you that despite the promises that have been made in our manifestos, we have ensured that there is adequate funds for it. And you've seen that the BJP governments have always implemented what they've promised, unlike the Congress, which is struggling in Karnataka. And they do not have many states to give us examples. That's the good news.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Shweta,
so
can I
much
please reply?
for
Shweta,
that.
please can I reply? Just two questions. Two questions.
Two
People
questions.
can make up their own minds.
Okay,
People can
Indra,
make up their own
really
mind after
quick
they
because
just two questions, then I'll finish up.
One
People
question.
can make
Indra,
their
one question.
own mind. Why did the
One.
government ban the export of rice? The world is having a food crisis because the Indian government banned rice exports. 30% of the world's rice comes from India. So if all is going well in India, why ban rice exports? It's against the farm law type of ideology.
Okay,
Second
but I'm
question,
sure that's a decision they must have taken. So let's
and
not get
this
into
is
why does the government do this. We don't have a
do
government
the government
representative.
data yourself. Find out,
Indra,
Google search.
we don't have a
Food
government
reserves.
representative here.
Are we here to worry about the Indians first or take care of the world? If
No,
the Indian
sir.
government
No, sir. If there was no problem, there would have been no export ban. I think that's why you're misinformed.
That's the point that we're discussing here.
All
Sir,
right.
I see you're coming from your own government, sir. And this is not a BJP point, but it's actually a State of the Union point.
So I'm sure you have your point of view, Indra, and Amit has his. But thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. Clearly, good news on the Indian economy, and I think all of us should, take heart in the fact that India continues to be a bright spot at a time when three of the world's largest economies are declining. India is continuing to grow, and I think that's very positive. Having said that, we are in election season, and the kind of announcements that are coming in from both the BJP and the Congress are worrying, and they could set the trend for 2024. So we do hope that there is fiscal prudence and very mindful rollout of welfare/freebies. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks so much for tuning in on Money Control, where we will be tracking Indian elections and its impact on India's polity and economy right here. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.